Parents laughed, saying my sister would crash at my place for a while. I stood up and said, "That's funny. I moved out 6 weeks ago." Mom froze. "Wait. Then where have you been living?" There are some moments in life when your entire world just shifts. For me, that moment was sitting at my parents' dinner table, watching them laugh as they casually handed my sister the keys to my apartment, an apartment they thought I still lived in. But the kicker? I just looked them dead in the eye and said, "Funny, I haven't lived there for 6 weeks." Can you even imagine the stunned silence? The way my mom's voice trembled when she asked, "Wait then, where exactly have you been staying?" My name's Natalie, and at 31 years old, I thought I'd finally built a life for myself. That downtown Chicago apartment? It wasn't just a place, it was years of scraping, of working myself to the bone. Because, unlike my sister, Elaine, I was never handed anything. So, when they tried to give my home away without even asking me, that was the line. That was when I finally stood up for the daughter they'd always forgotten. Growing up in suburban Illinois, it felt like I was always in Elaine's shadow. Our house had 4 bedrooms, but the spotlight? It only ever seemed to find her. From day one, the pattern was clear. Elaine got attention, praise, resources. Me? I was expected to just figure things out. I still remember my 16th birthday. I'd been dropping hints for months about a small pizza party with friends. But when the day came, my parents had completely forgotten. My mom was driving an 11-year-old Elaine to her dance recital. My dad was working late. I ended up ordering a single small pizza, eating it alone in my room, staring at college brochures. 5 years later, for Elaine's 16th, they rented an entire venue, hired a DJ, and gifted her a perfectly good car with a giant red bow. A car. School events followed the same pattern. My parents rarely showed up for my honor society inductions or debate finals. When I graduated as salutatorian, my mom spent most of the ceremony taking photos of Elaine in the audience, instead of watching me give my speech. For Elaine, they'd rearrange vacations for softball tournaments, stay up late helping with science projects. For me, crickets. This disparity just kept growing. In college, I worked 3 jobs simultaneously: coffee shop mornings, library evenings, waitressing on weekends. Every single dollar went towards Northwestern, where I studied marketing. My parents contributed what they could afford, about $500 a semester. Not enough for books, let alone tuition. Meanwhile, Elaine went to the University of Chicago with full parental support, graduating debt-free. When she struggled, my dad hired tutors. When she wanted to live off campus, they covered her security deposit and rent. No questions asked. After I graduated, I landed an entry-level marketing job in downtown Chicago. Modest salary, so I budgeted like a hawk, living with 3 roommates in a cramped apartment miles from the office. I packed lunches, skipped vacations, saved every spare dollar. 3 years, promotions, side gigs managing social media, and I finally had enough for a down payment on my own small 1-bedroom in River North. That apartment? It was everything to me. 900 square feet of hardwood floors, exposed brick, windows that caught the morning light just right. The kitchen was tiny, but I found a beautiful secondhand island that became my workspace and dining area. Every single piece of furniture, every little detail, represented careful selection and saving. The gray sectional couch? 6 months of overtime. My bedroom set came from 4 different thrift stores, painstakingly refinished on weekends. Nothing matched perfectly, but everything was intentionally chosen. It was mine. Just before all this family drama really exploded, I went through a painful breakup with Thomas, my boyfriend of 2 years. We met at a marketing conference, and I thought we had something solid. Then one evening, over dinner, he casually announced he'd taken a job in Seattle, without discussing it with me. When I reacted, he was genuinely surprised I might have wanted input on a decision that effectively ended our relationship. The breakup left me feeling incredibly vulnerable, questioning my judgment. Despite the unequal treatment, I tried to maintain a surface-level relationship with my family. I called my mother weekly, sent gifts, attended monthly Sunday dinners, a 40-minute drive each way, just to sit there while the conversation inevitably revolved around Elaine's latest drama or accomplishment. I'd smile and nod through stories about her third attempt at grad school or her new boyfriend. I'd clear the table while my mother fussed over Elaine. I'd hug everyone goodbye, already mentally calculating how long I could reasonably avoid the next dinner. These dinners were performances. I played the role of supportive daughter and sister, keeping my true feelings locked away. I'd learned early that expressing hurt or resentment only got me labeled too sensitive or jealous. So, I built walls. My real life, my friendships, my struggles, my achievements, all carefully separate. My apartment was my sanctuary from all of it. My proof that I could create something beautiful, entirely on my own. As we entered our 20s and 30s, Elaine's pattern of instability became impossible to ignore. While I built a steady career with consistent promotions, she bounced between jobs like a pinball. Barista for 3 months, quit because early hours disrupted her creative energy. 6 weeks at an admin job, quit because her supervisor didn't understand her process. Tried real estate, gave up after failing to close a single deal in 4 months. And after each job ended, our parents stepped in. They paid her rent, covered car payments, even funded a 3-month wellness retreat in Arizona when she claimed job hunting triggered her anxiety, all while telling me how proud they were of my independence. As if my self-sufficiency was convenient, not necessary. Her relationships followed the same pattern. She cycled through boyfriends and roommates, every breakup a dramatic fallout, always positioning her as the victim. Friends became toxic, roommates impossible. And every time, my parents would console her, offer advice, and, of course, more financial assistance. About 8 months ago, I started noticing concerning patterns regarding my apartment. The first incident, I invited Elaine over for dinner. As I cooked, she wandered around, opening closets, checking out my storage. Her comments seemed innocent. This place is so perfect for entertaining, and you have so much space for just one person. I thought nothing of it. Until she started asking detailed questions about my monthly maintenance fees, security arrangements. A month later, she called asking to borrow my black cocktail dress for a job interview. When I came home, I found not only the dress missing, but also 2 pairs of shoes, a designer handbag I'd splurged on for my 30th birthday, and several pieces of jewelry. When I confronted her, she acted genuinely surprised by my upset. I thought you'd want to help me look professional. It's not like you were using them today. Then the unannounced visits began. I'd come home to find Elaine sitting on my couch, let in by the doorman who recognized her as my sister. She'd wave off my surprise with I was in the neighborhood, or I needed some sister time. These visits always ended with her asking to borrow something, money for car repair, my laptop, my credit card. The situation escalated when I returned from a weekend visiting friends to discover Elaine had hosted a dinner party in my apartment. 8 strangers had used my dishes, sat on my furniture, left wine stains on my rug. When I called her in shock, she just laughed it off. My place was too small, and I knew you wouldn't mind. We cleaned up most of it. I finally confronted her directly. I sat her down over coffee. Elaine, I need you to understand. My apartment is my private space. You cannot come over without calling. You cannot borrow my things without asking. And you absolutely cannot host parties here, whether I'm home or not. Her response was so dismissive. Why are you being so uptight? We're sisters. What's yours is mine, right? You've always been so weird about sharing. When I stood firm, she did what she always did, called our parents. That evening, I received a lecture from my father about family supporting each other and a tearful call from my mother asking why I was being so selfish when Elaine just admires your beautiful home. The only validation came from my friend Jessica, who witnessed one of Elaine's uninvited visits. After my sister left, Jessica turned to me, her face etched with concern. Natalie, that was not normal. You know that, right? The way she went through your mail, the comments about how much everything must cost, the way she took your sweater without asking. She is not respecting your boundaries at all. The final straw? Things in my apartment started getting moved or disappearing entirely. My passport, which I kept in a specific drawer, was suddenly on my bookshelf. Financial documents rearranged. A pair of expensive wireless earbuds vanished. The security of my own home began to feel compromised, and with it, my sense of safety and independence. The breaking point came after I returned from a 3-day business trip to New York. I'd been presenting our agency's campaign to a major client. Meetings went exceptionally well. My boss had even hinted at a promotion if we landed the account. I was riding a wave of professional accomplishment as I unlocked my apartment door. That feeling evaporated instantly. My neat, organized space looked like it had been hit by a small hurricane. Empty wine bottles lined the kitchen counter. Takeout containers spilled from the overflowing bin. Couch pillows strewn everywhere. An unfamiliar jacket hung over my dining chair. As I moved through the apartment, a growing horror washed over me. Multiple towels lay damp on my bathroom floor. My expensive face creams and serums had been used, caps left off, contents significantly diminished. The guest bedding was rumpled on the couch, along with blankets I didn't recognize. But the most painful discovery waited in my bedroom. My journal, which I kept in my nightstand drawer, lay open on the bed, pages visibly turned and creased. Next to it sat a wine glass with a lipstick smudge that matched the shade Elaine typically wore. The invasion of this most private space, the words I had written about my feelings, my therapy journey, my deepest insecurities, it was breathtaking in its violation. I called Elaine immediately, my hands shaking with an anger I rarely allowed myself to feel. When she answered with a casual, "Hey sis," I could barely form coherent sentences. "My apartment. You were in my apartment with people. You read my journal." Her response was so predictable, it would have been comical in any other circumstance. "Oh, that? Yeah, I needed a break from my roommates. They've been super annoying lately, having loud sex and smoking inside. I just needed somewhere quiet to crash for a couple nights." "A couple nights? How long were you here? Who else was here?" My voice had risen to a shout. "Just a few friends. And only for like 3 nights, maybe 4. We cleaned up." "A blatant lie. You went through my personal things. You read my private journal. You had strangers sleeping in my home without my knowledge or permission." Her voice immediately shifted to the wounded, tearful tone she always used when confronted. "Why are you yelling at me? I was in a really bad place emotionally. My roommate situation is toxic, and I just needed my big sister. I thought you would understand. I thought you would want to help me." Before I could respond, my phone beeped. An incoming call from our mother. Of course. Right on cue. I declined it. But seconds later, Elaine said, "Mom wants us both at dinner tomorrow night. She says it's important." The emergency family dinner the next evening had all the elements of a carefully orchestrated intervention. Except I was the one being intervened upon, rather than the person who had violated boundaries. My parents' house looked exactly as it always had, family photos dominated by Elaine's achievements, furniture arranged to showcase my mother's porcelain figurines, the faint smell of my father's pipe tobacco despite his doctor's orders. The tension was palpable as we sat down to my mother's pot roast. My father cleared his throat several times, a sure sign he was preparing for a serious conversation. My mother fluttered around, refilling water glasses no one had drunk from, rearranging serving dishes that needed no adjustment. After a painfully silent 15 minutes of eating, my father put down his fork with deliberate precision. "Your sister has had some challenges recently," he began, as though Elaine weren't sitting directly across from me, studying her plate. "Her landlord has been completely unreasonable." My mother jumped in. "Completely unreasonable. Raising the rent with no warning." "There was warning," Elaine mumbled. 2 months ago." I remained silent, already seeing where this was heading. "The point is," my father continued, "your sister needs some temporary assistance. We've always taught you girls that family helps family." "Family helps family," my mother echoed, reaching to squeeze Elaine's hand. "And we know you have that lovely apartment with plenty of space." "Elaine was evicted," I stated flatly. "That's what this is about, isn't it? She didn't pay her rent again, and now she has nowhere to go." My parents exchanged glances. My mother's lips tightened. "It's not an eviction if you leave voluntarily before it gets to that point. We gave her the money for rent, my father added, a note of confusion entering his voice for the first time. Last month. And the month before. Elaine suddenly became very interested in rearranging the peas on her plate. So, what exactly are you asking me? I knew the answer, but I wanted them to say it explicitly. We think it would be best if Elaine stayed with you for a little while, my mother said, her voice syrupy sweet, just until she finds a new place. A few months at most. Absolutely not. The firmness in my voice surprised even me. Natalie, my father said, his tone hardening. Your sister needs help. This is what family does. No. I shot back, the words I'd swallowed for years finally spilling out. This is what our family does for Elaine. When I needed help with college tuition, I got a third job. When I needed a place to live, I found roommates and worked overtime. When I wanted to buy an apartment, I saved for years. That's different, my mother interjected. You've always been so independent, so capable. And that became the excuse for giving me nothing while giving her everything. I cried. I am not letting her move into my home. Not for a day. Not for a week. Certainly not for months. You have 2 bedrooms, my father argued, his face reddening. I have 1 bedroom and a home office that I need for my job. And even if I had 10 bedrooms, the answer would still be no. Elaine doesn't respect boundaries. She has proven that repeatedly. Oh, boundaries, my mother scoffed, waving her hand as if swatting an annoying fly. You and your boundaries. Sisters should share and support each other. Support goes both ways, I said. When has Elaine ever supported me? When has she respected my privacy or my possessions? When has she shown any concern for my feelings? You're being selfish, my father declared, playing his trump card, the accusation that had kept me in line my entire life. Your sister is family. So am I said, rising from the table, tears streaming down my face despite my best efforts to contain them. But that has never seemed to matter to any of you. I drove home that night, hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. Through the blur of tears, one thought crystallized with perfect clarity. Nothing would ever change. I would always be the responsible one, expected to sacrifice for Elaine. I would always be the daughter whose needs came second. I would always be giving pieces of myself away until there was nothing left. Unless I changed the pattern myself. That night, in my apartment, surrounded by the evidence of my sister's disregard for my space and belongings, I finally broke down completely. The sobs that tore through me came from somewhere deep, primal, years of suppressed hurt and anger finally finding release. I curled into a ball on my couch, clutching a pillow to my chest, as if it could somehow protect me from the pain radiating through my body. When the storm of tears finally subsided, I felt hollow, but oddly clear-headed. This space, which I had created as my sanctuary, no longer felt safe. The knowledge that my sister had been here, looking through my things, reading my private thoughts, inviting strangers, it had contaminated everything. The apartment no longer felt like mine. At 1 a.m, I called Taylor, my best friend since college. She answered on the 3rd ring, her voice thick with sleep. Nat? Are you okay? The whole story poured out of me, a jumbled, tear-stained account of the apartment invasion, the family dinner, the lifetime of being overlooked and undervalued. Taylor listened without interruption, occasionally murmuring sounds of support or outrage at particularly egregious details. When I finally ran out of words, the silence stretched between us. Then Taylor said something that changed everything. You know, you don't have to keep playing this role they've assigned you, right? You're allowed to rewrite the script. What do you mean? I asked, wiping tears from my cheeks. I mean that you've spent your entire life trying to earn approval from people who are constitutionally incapable of giving it to you. Your parents have shown you exactly who they are and how they value you. Believe them. And make decisions accordingly. The truth of her words resonated in my chest. So, what do I do? If it were me, Taylor said carefully, I would consider what my life would look like if I prioritized my own well-being over their expectations. Maybe that means moving somewhere they don't know about. Maybe it means strict boundaries about when and how you interact with them. Maybe it means therapy to work through the lifetime of being the less favored child. All of the above, I whispered, a plan already forming in my mind. The next morning, I called in sick to work for the first time in 3 years. Instead of going to the office, I spent the day researching apartments in neighborhoods far from River North. By afternoon, I'd scheduled viewings for 5 places. The following day, I saw them all and fell in love with the last one, a 4th-floor walk-up in Wicker Park with creaky wooden floors, a tiny but updated kitchen, and windows that looked out on a courtyard filled with trees. It was smaller than my current place, less polished, but it had character, and most importantly, no one in my family knew about it. I signed the lease that same day, putting down the security deposit and first month's rent from my emergency savings. The landlord, an older woman named Harriet, seemed delighted to have a quiet professional as a tenant. "When can you move in?" she asked. "As soon as possible," I told her. Would this weekend work? With the new apartment secured, my plan took shape with surprising speed. I opened a new bank account across town, transferring half my savings immediately. I set up mail forwarding to a post office box, not directly to the new apartment. I started bringing small boxes of my most treasured possessions to work with me, then dropping them at the new place on my way home. I decided to leave most of the furniture behind. The couch, the dining table, the bed frame, all of it felt tainted by what had happened. Only my grandmother's antique reading chair, a few cherished books, my most beloved kitchen items, and my clothes made the journey to Wicker Park. The rest I would deal with later. Setting up the new apartment became a kind of therapy. Each item I brought was carefully considered. Did it bring me joy? Did it serve a purpose? Was it free from negative associations? The resulting space was minimalist, but deeply personal. I splurged on new bedding, a soft duvet in shades of blue and green that reminded me of the ocean. I hung plants in the windows and photographs of friends on the walls. I bought a secondhand desk that fit perfectly in the alcove by the window, creating a workspace that felt both productive and peaceful. As the new place took shape, I felt a weight lifting from my shoulders. For the first time in my adult life, I had created a space that was completely unknown to my family, a sanctuary in the truest sense of the word. The practical aspects of my disappearing act required careful planning. I changed passwords on all my accounts. I spoke with my supervisor at work, explaining in vague terms that I was dealing with a family situation and needed to update my contact information. I arranged for packages to be delivered to an Amazon locker. I told only 3 people my new address: Taylor, Jessica, and my therapist, whom I had started seeing weekly. During the 6-week transition period, I maintained minimal contact with my family. I responded to texts with brief, uninformative replies. I deflected questions about getting together. I pleaded work deadlines when pressured about Sunday dinners. When my mother called, I kept conversations short and revealed nothing of substance. To anyone paying close attention, my withdrawal would have been obvious. But my family had never paid close attention to me unless they needed something. The new apartment quickly became more than just a living space. It became the headquarters for my emotional and psychological rebirth. Without the constant anxiety of unexpected visits or violations of my privacy, I found myself relaxing in ways I hadn't experienced before. I slept more soundly. I experimented with cooking elaborate meals just for the pleasure of it. I invited friends over without worrying about what they might report back to my family. Taylor visited often, bringing housewarming gifts and takeout dinner. "You look different," she observed one evening as we shared Thai food on cushions on the floor, my new dining table still on back order. "More peaceful." "I feel different," I admitted, "like I can finally breathe." In therapy, I worked through the complex emotions surrounding my family dynamics, the grief of never being the favorite child, the anger at years of unequal treatment, the guilt that still occasionally surfaced when I thought about my secret life. Dr. Reeves helped me understand that boundaries were not just healthy, but necessary, and that my parents' inability to respect mine was their failure, not mine. Families operate according to unspoken rules and assigned roles, she explained during one session. You were assigned the role of the self-sufficient one, the one who needs nothing. That worked for the family system, but it didn't work for you. By changing your behavior, you are disrupting that system. Expect resistance. The resistance, when it came, was exactly as predicted. As the weeks passed, my parents' messages grew increasingly urgent. My mother's texts evolved from casual check-ins to worried inquiries about my health. My father, who rarely communicated directly, began calling on his drive home from work. Elaine, predictably, vacillated between angry accusations and tearful apologies, depending on what she thought might get a response. I monitored it all from the peaceful distance of my new home, responding just enough to prevent an actual wellness check, but never revealing my true situation. The space was how quickly their worry about my well-being transformed into irritation when I failed to behave according to the established pattern. By the 6-week mark, I had settled fully into my new life. My name was on the mailbox. I knew the best coffee shop within walking distance and had become a regular at the farmer's market every Saturday. I'd met 2 neighbors who seemed like potential friends, one a graphic designer who worked from home, the other a kindergarten teacher with a contagious laugh. The apartment felt completely mine, in a way no space ever had before. I knew a confrontation with my family was inevitable. I even knew it would be painful. What I didn't know was exactly when or how it would happen. As it turned out, my mother made that decision for me with a text that simply read, "Emergency family dinner tomorrow night. No excuses. 6 p.m. sharp." In the weeks leading up to that fateful dinner, my parents' attempts to contact me had grown increasingly frantic. My phone would light up with my mother's name 5 or 6 times a day, the voicemails growing progressively more dramatic. "Natalie, honey, we're getting worried about you." Then, "Natalie, please call us back. We just want to know you're okay." And finally, "Natalie Thompson, I am your mother, and I demand you call me back immediately." My father's approach was more direct. "Your mother is worried sick. Call home," and later, "This behavior is unacceptable, Natalie. Family does not just disappear." Elaine's financial situation had apparently worsened after losing yet another job, this time at a boutique clothing store where, according to my mother's detailed voicemail, the manager just didn't appreciate Elaine's creative approach to the dress code. The subtext was clear: Elaine needed help, which meant I was expected to provide it. I had become skilled at deflecting questions about my whereabouts. When my mother asked if I would be at Sunday dinner, I replied that I had a work commitment. When my father texted asking if I could help move some furniture, I said I was fighting a cold. When Elaine asked if she could crash on my couch, just for tonight, I claimed my apartment was being painted. These excuses worked because my family had always accepted my independence as a fixed character trait rather than a hard-won achievement. They assumed I was just being difficult or going through some phase. It never seemed to occur to them that I might have taken actual steps to protect myself from their encroachment. The emergency family dinner text arrived on a Tuesday morning. My immediate instinct was to ignore it, but Dr. Reeves had been helping me recognize the difference between avoidance and boundaries. Avoiding my family indefinitely wasn't a sustainable solution. Establishing clear boundaries with them was. This dinner might provide the opportunity to do exactly that. "I'll be there," I texted back to my mother, 3 simple words, immediately triggering a flurry of happy face emojis in response. As I drove to my childhood home that Thursday evening, my stomach clenched with anxiety. I had prepared as thoroughly as possible, rehearsing responses to likely scenarios with both Taylor and Dr. Reeves. I had meditated that morning, gone for a long run, and worn an outfit that made me feel confident, a tailored blazer over a simple blouse and jeans. Still, as I parked in the driveway, the familiar weight of family expectations settled on my shoulders. The house looked exactly as it always did: my mother's carefully tended flower beds, my father's meticulously trimmed lawn, the porch light welcoming visitors while the interior revealed warm golden light through partially drawn curtains. The perfect suburban tableau. I took a deep breath, straightened my shoulders, and rang the doorbell rather than using my key. A small act of separation that didn't go unnoticed by my mother when she opened the door. "Since when do you ring the bell?" she asked, her attempt at lightness undermined by the tension around her eyes. "This is still your home, you know. Is it?" I replied quietly, stepping past her into the foyer. The atmosphere inside was thick with unspoken tension. My father sat in his usual recliner, newspaper folded beside him, pretending to watch a baseball game with the volume turned low. Elaine perched on the edge of the sofa, scrolling through her phone with faux nonchalance. She glanced up as I entered, her expression unreadable. "Dinner will be ready in 10 minutes, my mother announced, hurrying back to the kitchen. "I made your favorite pot roast with those little red potatoes you like." It was Elaine who loved those potatoes, not me. I'd been vegetarian for 3 years, a fact my mother consistently forgot or ignored. Rather than correcting her, I simply nodded and took a seat as far from Elaine as possible. Dinner was a masterclass in passive-aggressive communication. My mother filled every silence with nervous chatter about neighbors and distant relatives. My father punctuated her stories with occasional grunts of acknowledgement. Elaine pushed food around her plate, contributing nothing. I answered direct questions with minimal responses, waiting for the real purpose of this gathering to emerge. It came, as family bombshells often do, with dessert. My mother had made apple pie, not my favorite, but Elaine's. And as she served it with unnecessary flourish, my father cleared his throat. "Your sister has had some temporary setbacks," he began, as though continuing a conversation we had been having all along. "Job market is tough right now, very competitive." My mother nodded vigorously. "So competitive. And rental prices are just outrageous these days." I said nothing, taking a small bite of pie. "The thing is," my father continued, reaching into his pocket, "we think we've found a good solution. Temporary, of course, until Elaine gets back on her feet." With deliberate ceremony, he placed a set of keys on the table between us. "My keys? To my River North apartment. We think it makes perfect sense for your sister to use your place for a while," my mother said, her voice bright with false certainty. "You have all that space, and you're at work most of the time anyway." "We already spoke to your building manager," my father added. "Mr. Peterson, nice fellow. He said it's no problem to add Elaine to your lease temporarily." I stared at the keys, a strange calm settling over me. "You spoke to my building manager without talking to me first?" "We knew you'd agree once you thought about it," my mother said. "Family helps family." Elaine finally looked up, a small, victorious smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "I promise I'll keep everything super clean this time," she said, the implication that she would be moving and regardless of my opinion hanging in the air between us. My father nodded decisively. "It's all arranged then. Elaine can move in this weekend. Just for a few months until she finds something else." They were all looking at me now, waiting for my acquiescence. The script they had followed my entire life playing out exactly as they expected. The responsible daughter would once again sacrifice for the family. Would once again put her sister's needs above her own. Would once again accept the unequal distribution of support and respect. I looked at each of them in turn, my father's confident expression, my mother's pleading eyes, my sister's barely concealed triumph, and made my decision. I felt strangely calm as I looked at my family gathered around the table, all waiting for my predictable compliance. For once, I held information they didn't have, power they couldn't anticipate. The irony that they had inadvertently created this situation through their own actions was not lost on me. "That's funny," I said, my voice steady and clear. "I haven't lived in that apartment for 6 weeks." The silence that followed was absolute. My mother's fork clattered against her plate. My father's confident expression froze, then crumbled into confusion. Elaine's smug smile vanished, replaced by widening eyes and parting lips. "What do you mean you haven't lived there?" my mother finally asked, her voice trembling slightly. "Where have you been staying?" My father leaned forward, his face flushing with the first stirrings of anger, always his go-to emotion when control slipped from his grasp. "What are you talking about, Natalie?" "Of course, you live there. We were just on the phone with your building manager yesterday." "I still own the apartment," I clarified. "I still pay the mortgage. But I do not live there anymore. I moved out 6 weeks ago after Elaine let herself in while I was on a business trip, invited strangers over, went through my personal belongings, and read my private journal." Elaine's face went pale, then red. "I didn't. It wasn't like that." "It was exactly like that," I countered, still maintaining my composure. "You violated my space and my privacy. You always have. Because you've never been taught that other people's boundaries matter." "Boundaries again," my mother said, throwing up her hands. You and these boundaries. We are family, Natalie. Family does not have boundaries. Healthy families absolutely have boundaries. I replied. And healthy families respect each other. They don't play favorites or expect one child to constantly sacrifice for another or make major decisions about someone's home without consulting them. My father's expression had shifted from confusion to full-blown anger. So, you've been lying to us for weeks, hiding where you live? What kind of daughter does that? The kind who has learned that it's the only way to protect herself, I said quietly. The kind who has spent her entire life trying to earn the same consideration automatically given to her sister. The kind who finally realized that was never going to happen. This is ridiculous, my mother said, tears gathering in her eyes. We have always treated you girls exactly the same. I couldn't help the short, bitter laugh that escaped me. Mom, that is just not true. And I think on some level you know it. When Elaine needed college tuition, you paid it. When I needed it, I worked 3 jobs. When Elaine lost apartments because she spent rent money on other things, you bailed her out. When I saved for years to buy my own place, you barely acknowledged it until you decided it could solve Elaine's problems. That is completely different, my father interjected. Elaine needs more support. She's sensitive. And I was capable, I finished for him. So capable that you decided I didn't need parents, just occasional observers who stepped in only when they needed something from me. Elaine had been unusually quiet, but now she spoke up, her voice taking on the wounded tone that had always worked so effectively. Where am I supposed to go now? I have nowhere to live. That is not my problem, I said, surprised at how easily the words came. It has never been my problem, but somehow it always became my problem. Not anymore. You cannot just abandon your sister, my mother gasped. Where are you living? We need to know where you are. No, you don't, I said firmly. That is the boundary I'm setting. I have a new place where I feel safe and secure. Elaine doesn't get to know where it is. You don't get to know where it is. Not until I can trust that information will not be used against me. Against you, my father scoffed. We're your parents, not your enemies. Then start acting like it. I replied, rising from my chair. Start respecting my choices. Start treating me with the same consideration you give Elaine. Start acknowledging that I am an adult with the right to decide who enters my home and when. You cannot just leave, my mother said, panic edging into her voice. We need to discuss this as a family. I've been trying to discuss this my entire life, I said, gathering my purse. You've never been interested in listening. When you are ready to have a real conversation, one where my feelings and needs matter as much as Elaine's, you know how to reach me. And if we need to see you, if there's an emergency, my father's voice had lost some of its certainty. You can call or text if it's a genuine emergency and not another attempt to manipulate me into solving Elaine's problems. I will respond. Elaine was crying now, real tears streaming down her face. You're being so mean. I just needed help. For the first time, I looked directly at my sister, seeing not the perpetual victim she portrayed, but the adult who had consistently chosen to take rather than ask, to assume rather than earn. You have always needed help, Elaine, and I have always given it, even when it hurt me to do so. That ends today. It's time for you to solve your own problems. As I walked toward the door, my mother followed, her hands fluttering anxiously. You cannot just walk away from family, Natalie. Family is forever. I paused, my hand on the doorknob. I am not walking away from family, Mom. I am walking away from the role you assigned me in this family. I am still your daughter. I still love you. But I will not be Elaine's safety net anymore, and I will not be the dependable one you only notice when you need something. The drive back to my new apartment was surreal. My hands should have been shaking. My heart should have been racing. Instead, I felt a profound sense of peace washing over me. For the first time in my adult life, I had spoken my truth without apology or modification. I had set a boundary and held it, despite the emotional manipulation that had always worked before. As I climbed the 4 flights of stairs to my apartment, I realized I was smiling. The space that greeted me felt more like home than anywhere I had ever lived. Not because of the furnishings or the location, but because it represented a choice I had made entirely for myself. A choice to value my own well-being. A choice to rewrite the script of my family relationships. A choice to finally, truly put myself first. The days following the confrontation brought a storm of emotions I hadn't fully anticipated. Relief came first, a profound unburdening that left me feeling physically lighter. Then came waves of doubt. Had I been too harsh? Should I have found a gentler way? Was I destroying my family relationships beyond repair? Guilt followed, deeply ingrained from years of being told that family obligation trumped personal needs. And underneath it all, a current of grief for the supportive family I had always wanted but never truly had. The initial loneliness was harder than I expected. Sunday evenings, when I would normally have been at family dinner, felt particularly empty. I filled them with new rituals, calling friends, taking long walks through my neighborhood, cooking elaborate meals just for myself, attending community yoga classes at the studio down the street. Slowly, the emptiness began to feel less like deprivation and more like possibility, a canvas waiting for new connections and experiences. My phone became a battlefield of emotional manipulation. My father's messages were curt and accusatory. Your mother is heartbroken. Elaine had to move in with a coworker. This is not how we raised you. My mother alternated between guilt trips. I cried myself to sleep last night, and desperate attempts at normalcy. I saw a blouse today that would look lovely with your coloring. Elaine's approach was the most erratic, ranging from vicious attacks, "You have always been jealous of me," to pathetic pleas, "I have nowhere to go," to attempts at boundary crossing, "Just tell me your new address." I promise I won't tell Mom and Dad. I responded to none of them at first, using the techniques Dr. Reeves had taught me to acknowledge the emotions their messages triggered without feeling compelled to act on them. Instead, I focused on building my new life. I joined a book club. I volunteered at a weekend food pantry. I accepted dinner invitations from coworkers I had previously kept at a professional distance. Each new connection reminded me that family could be chosen, not just inherited. After 3 weeks of silence, I finally responded to one of my mother's messages, a simple note asking about my father's upcoming birthday. This opened a careful, limited channel of communication. I answered texts but ignored emotional manipulation. I deflected questions about my location. I responded to updates about extended family, but not to news about Elaine's latest crisis. It was exhausting at first, this constant vigilance, but gradually it became second nature. 5 weeks after the confrontation, I agreed to meet my parents at a coffee shop halfway between their house and my office. The neutral territory was deliberate, suggested by Dr. Reeves as a way to avoid the emotional triggers of the family home. I arrived early, selecting a table near the door, both for easy escape if needed, and to allow me to watch their arrival. They looked older somehow, my parents. My father's shoulders slightly more stooped, my mother's smile a bit more strained. They spotted me immediately, my mother raising her hand in an uncertain wave, my father nodding stiffly. As they approached, I noticed they were both dressed formally, my father in a button-down shirt rather than his usual weekend polo, my mother in her church dress rather than casual clothes. They were treating this like an official meeting, which was both amusing and sad. "You look well," my mother said after the awkward exchange of greetings. Her eyes scanned me, as though checking for visible signs of distress or hardship. "I am well," I confirmed, sipping my latte. "Work is good. Life is good." My father cleared his throat. "Your sister asks about you." "Of course." That would be his opening gambit. I nodded, but offered nothing in response. The conversation that followed was halting and uncomfortable, full of long pauses and careful navigation around sensitive topics. My mother talked about the neighbors, her garden club, a recipe she had tried. My father mentioned a problem with the gutters, the baseball season, a documentary he had watched. I shared limited details about a work project, a movie I had enjoyed, a new coffee shop near my office. We were like actors performing a family conversation without any of the ease or intimacy that should have accompanied it. It was my mother who finally broke through the superficial exchange. "We miss you," she said suddenly, her voice catching. "The house feels empty without you coming for Sunday dinners." "I haven't lived at home for 12 years, Mom," I pointed out gently. "I know, but you were still part of our routine, part of our lives." Tears welled in her eyes. I don't understand why that had to change. My father, uncomfortable with emotional displays, shifted in his seat. What your mother is trying to say is that we may have taken your independence for granted. Your consistency. It was perhaps the closest thing to an admission of fault I had ever heard from him. I waited, allowing the moment to breathe. We never meant to make you feel less important than your sister, my mother continued, dabbing at her eyes with a napkin. You were always so capable, so self-sufficient. Elaine needed more of my time, my attention. That's the problem, Mom, I said quietly. You confused capability with not having needs. Everyone has needs. I just learned early on that mine wouldn't be met, so I stopped expressing them. My father frowned. That's not fair, Natalie. We provided for you. We supported your education. You paid $500 per semester toward my education, I corrected. I worked 3 jobs to cover the rest. You paid for Elaine's entire degree, plus her apartment, plus spending money. Can you see how different that is? He opened his mouth to argue, then closed it again, something like realization dawning in his eyes. We never meant to hurt you, my mother whispered. I believe that, I said. But you did hurt me. And you continued hurting me even when I tried to establish boundaries. The apartment situation was just the final straw. Giving Elaine keys to my home without even asking me, that showed me exactly how little you respected me as an adult with my own life. My father looked down at his untouched coffee. We should have asked you first. The simple acknowledgement, so long in coming, loosened something in my chest. Yes, you should have. Can you forgive us? My mother asked, reaching across the table for my hand. I let her take it, but my response was measured. Forgiveness is a process, not an event. I am working on it, but rebuilding trust will take time and consistent effort from all of us. And Elaine, my father asked. She's still your sister. Elaine and I will need to find our own way forward, I said firmly. That's between her and me. She's staying with her friend Jasmine right now, my mother offered. But it's not ideal, very small apartment. I recognized the subtle attempt to reactivate my sense of responsibility and shook my head. Mom, I am not responsible for Elaine's housing situation. That is exactly the pattern we need to break. They both looked uncomfortable but didn't argue further. As we prepared to leave, my mother asked the inevitable question, when will we see you again? Will you come to Sunday dinner next week? Not yet, I said. Honestly, I need more time. But maybe we could meet for coffee again in a couple of weeks. It was a small step, but their cautious smiles suggested it was enough for now. Elaine was noticeably absent from that first meeting and from the careful text exchanges that followed. 3 weeks later, I received a message from her that stood out from her previous communications. I'm starting therapy. The therapist says I should apologize to you when I'm ready. I'm not ready yet, but wanted you to know I'm working on it. It was the first time my sister had ever acknowledged, even indirectly, that her behavior might require amends. I sent back a simple response. I'm proud of you for taking that step. In my own therapy sessions, Dr. Reeves helped me process the complex emotions of rebuilding family relationships on new terms. What you are doing is incredibly difficult, she acknowledged. You are not just changing your own behavior. You are asking an entire family system to change patterns established over decades. There will be backsliding. There was. Particularly when my mother began making cautious inquiries about my new address, or when my father hinted that family gatherings would be so much simpler if Elaine and I could just put the past behind us. Each time, I gently but firmly redirected, reinforcing the boundaries I had established. Meanwhile, my life in Wicker Park flourished. I befriended Zoe, the kindergarten teacher from down the hall, who introduced me to her circle of friends. I joined a community garden on the block, tending to herbs and vegetables in a small plot that connected me to neighbors of all ages. I accepted a promotion at work that acknowledged the quality of my contributions rather than just my reliability. Most importantly, I developed a new relationship with myself. Without the constant drain of family expectations and boundary violations, I discovered interests and aspects of my personality that had been suppressed for years. I took a pottery class and found I had a natural aptitude for working with clay. I joined a hiking group that explored state parks within driving distance of Chicago. I began writing short stories, something I had enjoyed in college but abandoned in the demands of adult life. 6 months after that confrontation at my parents' dinner table, I invited them to meet me at a restaurant near my new apartment. It was a calculated risk, bringing them into my neighborhood, but one that felt right. After dinner, I walked them to my building, but did not invite them up, the boundaries still holding firm, but softening enough to allow them this knowledge. "It looks nice," my father said, studying the brick facade with approval. "Good neighborhood." "It is," I agreed. "I'm happy here." My mother squeezed my hand. "That's what matters, honey, that you are happy." I smiled, recognizing the genuine sentiment behind her words. Our relationship was far from perfect, still imbalanced in many ways, still carrying the shadows of old patterns. But it was evolving, reshaping itself into something that might, with continued effort on all sides, eventually become healthy. As for Elaine, our reconciliation came more slowly. 3 months of therapy helped her recognize patterns in her own behavior, and she reached out with a genuine apology that acknowledged specific actions rather than making vague excuses. We began with carefully structured interactions, coffee dates with clear start and end times, activities that didn't involve my home or possessions. Slowly, cautiously, we began rebuilding a relationship based on mutual respect rather than the dysfunctional dynamics of our childhood. The journey of setting boundaries and rebuilding family relationships on healthier terms is ongoing. There are still difficult conversations, still moments when old patterns threaten to reassert themselves. But I no longer feel responsible for everyone else's emotions and needs at the expense of my own. I no longer sacrifice my well-being to maintain an illusion of family harmony. Sometimes the bravest thing we can do is recognize when a relationship is damaging us and take steps to protect ourselves. Even if those steps feel radical. Even if they go against everything we've been taught about family obligation. It's not selfish to require respect. It's not wrong to establish boundaries. And sometimes, the only way to truly love your family is to love yourself enough to change the dynamic entirely. Have you ever had to set difficult boundaries with family members who constantly cross them? Tell me what you think, I really want to know.